An aggressor squadron screams across the Baltic sky, closing in on the Swedish Saab 35 Draken at Mach 1.7. By all conventional wisdom, the brand new Swedish fighter should have been trapped, outgunned, outmaneuvered, and seconds away from being another Cold War casualty. But this is no ordinary aircraft. Suddenly, the Draken's nose pitches up violently, almost perpendicular to its flight path. The fighter seems to hang suspended in midair as its forward momentum evaporates, defying the laws of physics. It was a move that was supposed to be impossible. Any pursuing jet would become a target as the Draken ripped backwards on their tail. The Swedes called it kort, short parry. It would later become known worldwide as the mythical Cobra Maneuver, and for now, in 1963, it exists nowhere else on Earth. To pull it off required one of the riskiest and most dangerous designs ever implemented in an aircraft. The Saab 35 Draken would either kill or be killed by the superstall. The Soviets are coming. As the smoke of World War II faded across Europe, a new threat emerged. The world had been split in two, slowly spiraling toward the era of nuclear annihilation. The Soviet Union and the United States had drawn lines in the sand, and for those caught in between, neutrality was not a synonym for safety. Sweden, a nation that had steered clear of direct conflict for over a century, officially remained non-aligned. Still, geography would force the country to pay close attention to its Soviet neighbors. Guarding the gateway to the Baltic Sea, Sweden was a prize no superpower could ignore. The Soviets saw it as a stepping stone toward Western Europe. NATO saw it as a crucial buffer against communist expansion. The Swedes saw the writing on the wall. Their peace was only as strong as their ability to defend it. Paranoia ran high. Today, only 2% of Sweden's budget is allocated to the country's defense. At the height of the Cold War, it reached around 20%. Entire cities were redesigned to withstand air raids, with a legal mandate requiring every building with more than one family to include a bomb shelter. Underground bunkers multiplied across the country, concealed beneath shopping centers, schools, and suburban homes. Scattered across Sweden's coastline and archipelagos, secret military installations stood watch. Oja, the nation's southernmost island, was a fortress disguised as a quiet fishing village. Beneath its rocky terrain, 38 underground armament installations lay hidden, housing weapons capable of striking enemy warships over 16 miles away. Their reinforced bunkers, buried deep beneath the ground, were designed to withstand nuclear blasts 5 times stronger than the bomb that obliterated Hiroshima. According to military expert Jaak Krisa, Oja's defenses were, quote, the most advanced artillery in the world during the Cold War. But Sweden knew that if war erupted, bunkers and coastal guns alone wouldn't save them. Soviet MiGs were rolling off assembly lines by the thousands, swarming the airspace over the Baltic. If Sweden was to have any hope of maintaining its independence, it had to match Soviet air superiority with something of its own. The race to build the Saab 35 Draken had begun. Sweden's savior. The Swedish Air Force set its sights on a new interceptor as early as 1949. The demands were high. Military forces required a jet fast enough to outrun enemy bombers, maneuverable enough to engage them in a fight, and rugged enough to operate from anywhere, capable of taking off on reinforced public roads just as well as on traditional airstrips. At first, the goal was to build a fighter capable of reaching Mach 1.4 to 1.5, which at the time was already ambitious enough. However, as the arms race between NATO and the Soviets escalated, Swedish defense officials pushed the limits even further. By the late 1950s, the requirement had jumped to an unthinkable Mach 2. Sweden was on track to develop one of the fastest jets in Europe, but whether or not they would crash and burn in the process was yet to be seen. On top of this demanding challenge, officials determined that raw speed alone wasn't enough. The new fighter had to be ready for takeoff at a moment's notice. Rain, snow, or darkness couldn't stand in the way. It needed to be fully rearmed and refueled in under 10 minutes, not by elite ground crews, but by lightly trained conscripts. It had to be a dogfighter, a high-speed interceptor, and a defensive powerhouse, all in one. To meet these demands, engineers at Swedish aerospace company Saab scoured every aviation concept available, and one design kept pulling them in: the Delta Wing. A triangle-shaped wing with immense aerodynamic potential, the Delta Wing had already shown promise in high-speed aircraft. It allowed for rapid acceleration and superior lift at supersonic speeds, but no one knew if it could work in combat. It was a gamble that could either revolutionize Swedish aviation or end in disaster. The Saab engineers realized a standard Delta Wing alone wouldn't cut it. They had to push further if they wanted to balance speed with agility. They experimented with an even more radical concept, the double Delta Wing. This new design was created with two different sections, an inner wing with a more superficial sweep angle that helped pilots when taking off and operating at lower speeds, and an outer section with a steeper sweep meant to reduce drag at supersonic speeds and enhance stability. Theoretically, this design would allow the aircraft to operate from Sweden's wartime highways while still reaching Mach 2, excelling in both low-speed dogfighting and high-speed intercept missions. But there was a problem. No one had ever built an operational plane like this before. The double Delta existed only on paper. There were no wind tunnel tests, real-world data, or precedents to follow. And so, a team of over 500 workers, led by head engineer Eric Bratt, set out to push the limits of aviation. The Little Dragon. Before the Saab 35 Draken could take to the skies, engineers had to prove their radical double Delta Wing design would even work. To conduct testing, they created a scaled-down experimental prototype labeled the Saab 210, later nicknamed Lille Draken, or Little Dragon. At 70% the size of the final aircraft, Little Draken didn't look like anything aviation experts had ever seen. Its tailless double Delta wings stretched 16 feet across, with their sharp leading edges cutting through the air almost parallel to the length of the fuselage. The wing root air intakes, positioned dangerously close to the nose, gulped down air for its Armstrong-Siddeley Adder engine, which pushed the small jet to speeds of 400 miles per hour. By 1952, the prototype was ready, and the man tasked with proving its airworthiness was Bengt Olo, one of Sweden's most skilled test pilots. On January 21st, Olo taxied to the runway. The engines came to life, sending roars across the tarmac as he braced for takeoff. With a sharp pull on the stick, the Little Dragon shot forward, its compact frame barely skimming the surface before it leaped into the skies above Stockholm. For the first time, Saab's double Delta Wing design was in flight. Olo pushed it through various speeds and altitudes, testing its stability, low-speed handling, and responsiveness. Despite initial skepticism, Lille Draken handled surprisingly well, carving through the air with the precision few had expected from such an unconventional design. As Saab engineers gathered data, they continued refining the design, modifying Lille Draken into the upgraded Saab 210B, pushing the air intakes back toward the cockpit and giving the pilot a more precise field of view. The Little Dragon flew for years, racking up over 880 sorties by 1955. Each flight brought Saab engineers closer to their ultimate goal of building a full-scale, combat-ready jet capable of facing Soviet fighters at high speeds. On October 25, 1955, the first full-size Saab 35 Draken prototype stood on the runway. In a flash, the Draken climbed into the skies, slicing through the air without struggle. Shortly after, a second prototype, now equipped with an afterburner, was sent up to push the limits of the Saab 35 even further. As it climbed, accelerating through the Nordic sky, a sonic boom shattered the silence. The Draken had just broken the sound barrier without even trying. Saab's engineers stood in awe. Their radical design had not only worked, it had created one of the fastest, most powerful interceptors in Europe. Sweden had done the impossible. The Dragon above Sweden. The Saab 35 Draken officially entered service in 1960. Aside from a unique silhouette and incredible speed, the cockpit boasted advanced avionics that pushed the limits of technology. Its onboard radar system could track aerial targets and map terrain simultaneously, giving pilots a real-time overview of their surroundings, something few jets at the time could match. Powering this beast was the Svenska Flygmotor RM6BC turbojet engine, a Swedish-built, afterburning version of the Rolls-Royce Avon, capable of propelling the aircraft to Mach 2. At the time, only a handful of fighters had ever reached such speeds. In combat, the Draken was heavily armed for air superiority missions. It could carry up to 4 AIM-9 Sidewinder air-to-air missiles beneath its wings. Additionally, It could be equipped with bombs, rockets, or dual 30mm automatic cannons. But the Draken wasn't just a fighter. Depending on the mission, its weapons could be swapped out for extra fuel tanks or camera pods. A bump in the road. By the early 1960s, the Saab 35 had exceeded all expectations. But then, cracks began to show on the Saab 35's perfect facade. The very thing that made the Draken so revolutionary, its double delta wing, was also a weak spot. Landing the early models of the aircraft became a nightmare. While excellent for speed and agility, the wing configuration created instability during descent, forcing pilots to fight to stabilize the aircraft as they touched down manually. Then came the biggest threat, the superstall, an aerodynamic phenomenon dreaded by all pilots. The Draken had a habit of stalling mid-flight without warning, and once it did, there was no easy way to recover. The aircraft would suddenly lose speed, tumbling into a fatal descent as air failed to flow properly over its wings. For a pilot, this was the ultimate nightmare. The Draken could drop from the sky like a stone, leaving only seconds to react before crashing. Ejecting was often the only option for survival. The superstall threatened to ground Sweden's prized fighter, but the Swedish Air Force wasn't about to let the Draken be grounded when it was just taking off. Instead of scrapping years of development and returning to the drawing board, Saab engineers made a bold decision. If they couldn't eliminate the superstall, they would learn to master it. Taming the beast. As years passed, pilots kept pushing the J-35 Draken to its limits, yet no one could break through the aerodynamic nightmare of the superstall once it took control of the aircraft. Again and again, pilots would take off, training day and night, determined to control the Draken's unstable flight dynamics, just to be met with an invisible force that appeared impossible to counter. Many pilots lost their lives during these test flights. For a moment, the future of the Saab 35's operational capabilities seemed to be at stake. Then, a breakthrough occurred. Pilots began to notice something peculiar. When entering a superstall, they could counter it by aggressively pushing the nose down as fast as possible, breaking the stall before it became catastrophic. What began as a survival instinct turned into an intentional maneuver. Armed with this new knowledge, Swedish test pilots Bengt Olo and Selan Udderborn started crafting a new aerial technique that could save the future of the Saab 35. For years, they refined the technique, testing and perfecting it. By 1963, they had unlocked something extraordinary. In the middle of a high-speed flight, a pilot could suddenly pitch the nose up to a near-vertical position, 90 to 120 degrees, causing the aircraft to slow down dramatically in midair. Then, with precise timing, the pilot would snap the nose forward, restoring normal airflow over the wings and regaining full control before the jet lost too much speed. This radical counter-stall technique became known as the kort, or short parry, named after the quick defensive move used in fencing. But as its legend grew, the world would know it by a different name, the Cobra Maneuver. For the Draken, this changed everything. Without incorporating air brakes, the aircraft could now bleed speed on command, allowing it to land on short wartime runways, even after approaching at high velocity. But in combat, the Cobra Maneuver was even more devastating, serving as a trap waiting to be set by any enemy pilot who thought they had the Draken in their sights. By dramatically losing speed amid a chase, the Draken could have its hunters overshoot it, suddenly turning the tables and giving its pilot the right angle to strike. Sweden had not only solved the J-35's greatest weakness, they had weaponized it. As the Saab 35 spread beyond Sweden's borders to Finland and Austria, so did the Cobra Maneuver. Yet, despite its proven effectiveness, it remained a well-kept Scandinavian secret for decades. It would take over 20 years before the Soviet Union finally caught up, when test pilot Igor Volk successfully executed the Cobra Maneuver in an Su-27 during practice. However, the world wouldn't witness a public demonstration of this maneuver by the Soviets until 1989, when Viktor Pugachev stunned audiences by performing the move at the Paris Air Show. The Golden Years. The first fleet of operational Saab 35 Drakens was delivered to Fighter Wing F-13 in Norrköping, officially starting their role as the nation's frontline guardians against the escalating threats of the Cold War. By the late 1960s, Draken reigned supreme over Swedish airspace. Multiple SAF wings had been fully equipped with the jet, and among them, one variant stood above the rest, the J-35F Draken, the most heavily produced model, with over 230 aircraft built. Fitted with the RM-6C turbojet engine, it could pierce the heavens over Sweden like no other aircraft before it, soaring past 65,000 feet. The Swedish engineered AIM-4 Falcon air-to-air missiles turned it into a lethal predator, ensuring that anything caught in its path had little hope of escape. As Sweden sought to bolster its allies, Drakens took flight beyond their homeland, each model evolving to meet the needs of its new pilots. Denmark transformed its Drakens into strike aircraft, equipping them with AGM-12 bullpup missiles, electronic countermeasures, and extended fuel storage. These were the heaviest Drakens ever built, bristling with extra firepower and range, capable of hitting ground targets with extreme precision. Finland and Austria followed, upgrading their Drakens with new avionics, enhanced weapon systems, and electronic countermeasures. Even the United States got its hands on the Draken, using the aircraft for test pilot training and aerial combat simulations. For nearly half a century, the Draken remained operational. However, despite its lethal capabilities, the Saab 35 never saw direct combat. Yet Mach dogfights and border patrols continuously demonstrated its full power. One of the most famous engagements pitted a Saab 35 Draken against its supposed successor, the Saab 37 Viggen. The Viggen, a newer, more advanced fighter, was expected to dominate its aging predecessor, but the Draken would not go down without a fight. The two aircraft raced through the sky. The Viggen closed in, locking on to the Draken, its pilot confident in his superior machine. Victory seemed imminent. But then, the Draken's pilot pulled back sharply on the stick, tilting the nose upward in an instant, defying gravity as the aircraft pitched to a vertical position, executing the Cobra Maneuver. For a split second, the Draken hung motionless in the air. The Viggen, moving too fast to react, overshot its target, blasting past in a helpless blur. With a flick of the controls, the Draken snapped back into position, diving onto the Viggen's 6 o'clock. The Viggen would have been seconds away from destruction if this had been a real battle. Even against its successor, the Saab 35 remained the king of the skies. As the Saab 35 Draken gradually retired from service, its successors carried on its mission, but refined its capabilities. Each new generation of Swedish fighters built upon Draken's revolutionary design, ensuring that Sweden's air defense remained at the forefront of aviation technology. A few years after the Draken's debut, the Saab 37 Viggen took center stage. Unlike its predecessor's double delta wing, the Viggen introduced a canard delta configuration, with small forward-mounted canards that drastically improved maneuverability, allowing the aircraft to generate more lift, recover from stalls more effectively, and execute shorter takeoffs and landings. Beyond aerodynamics, the Viggen was a technological marvel. It was among the first fighters in the world to feature a fully digital central computer, the CK-37, which allowed it to integrate seamlessly with Sweden's Strill 60 air defense network. This gave Swedish pilots unparalleled situational awareness, allowing for near-automated flight systems years ahead of their rivals. Throughout the Cold War, Viggen pilots were constantly on high alert, intercepting Soviet aircraft encroaching on Swedish airspace. But it was in the 1980s that the Viggen achieved one of its most legendary feats, successfully radar locking onto the uncatchable SR-71 Blackbird. For years, the U.S. Air Force's Blackbird, flying at speeds exceeding Mach 3, was believed to be invulnerable to interception. It carried advanced electronic countermeasures to jam enemy radars, making lock-ons nearly impossible. However, Swedish Viggen pilots rewrote the rules of engagement. With Sweden's ground-based radar networks, Viggen squadrons could anticipate and intercept the Blackbird's flight paths. Against all odds, they successfully locked on to SR-71s multiple times, proving that even the fastest aircraft on Earth was not beyond their reach. In 2007, the Viggen left service, making way for a fighter carrying the Draken's legacy into the modern age, the Saab JAS-39 Gripen. Where the Draken once set the standard, the Gripen perfected it. Designed as a true swing-roll fighter, the Gripen can seamlessly transition between air-to-air, air-to-ground, and reconnaissance missions within the same sortie, making it one of the most adaptable fighters in the world. At the center of its superiority is a fully digital avionics suite featuring integrated sensor fusion, advanced data link systems, and an active electronically scanned array radar, ensuring that Gripen pilots can detect, track, and engage multiple targets. Unlike its predecessors, which primarily served Sweden and a few allies, the Gripen has found a home in air forces worldwide. Today, it serves not only Sweden, but also Brazil, the Czech Republic, Hungary, Thailand, and South Africa, with full NATO interoperability, ensuring that Sweden's legacy is felt far beyond its borders. Though the Cold War threats that once shaped Sweden's air doctrine have faded, the spirit of the Draken lives on through this modern embodiment of the aircraft that once redefined aerial warfare. Today, over 100 Saab 35 Drakens remain scattered across the world, though most are preserved in museums or stored away. Only a handful can take off the runway, with Sweden and the United States being the last known nations to keep airworthy Drakens in their arsenals.